Well, welcome everybody. We'll go ahead and get started. I'm John Samet, the chair of the search for the next chair of the Department of Occupational Environmental Health and interim chair of the department, eagerly awaiting a successor. I'm delighted to introduce Sheryl Magzamen. I think probably well known to most of you in the room or online. A few things about Sheryl. She received her undergraduate degree from Cornell, an MPH from Emory, and her PhD at Berkeley. I think most notably at Berkeley, the chair of her dissertation committee was a well-known friend of mine, an epidemiological curmudgeon, Ira Tager. For those of you who know Ira, the name still strikes fear in the heart of those who attended his doctoral seminars at Berkeley. I think imprinting her work was her time spent as a Robert Wood Johnson Health and Society Scholars Program scholar at the University of Wisconsin. I think a program that has produced many people who are deeply engaged in understanding the social determinants of health and how they play out. I think also notable about Sheryl's scholarship is that it's about generating evidence that will lead to action. And I think that's a distinguishing characteristic, whether it's locally here in Denver, Colorado, or well beyond. She also has a long record of teaching and mentoring. So delighted to have you here, Sheryl.
Thank you, John.
Please go ahead.
Thanks everyone. Oh, wow, I haven't even done anything yet. So thanks for the warm welcome. So I'm Sheryl. Thanks for having me. And even though I'm a part of the School of Public Health, I have put my CSU title on here just for some grounding. I am an associate professor and associate department head for graduate education in the Department of Environmental and Radiological Health Sciences. So I'm going to give you a quick roadmap to the presentation today. I'll get a little bit about my background and thinking about occupational environmental health and thinking about case studies that we are contending with currently. And then also some old themes that seem to be recurring in the OEH space. I'm going to talk a little bit about places where I've tried to move with scholarship and teaching, which is systems thinking, and then some ideas and initiatives in terms of mission, vision, shared values, and then some program brainstorms that I hope you will receive and think about. I'll talk a little bit about my managerial and leadership style, and I've left plenty of time for questions. So background, and John has given you a little bit, but I have taught GIS and geospatial health analysis at CSU and jointly with Jim Crooks here at the School of Public Health. So I'm from New York. I did my undergraduate degree in biology at Cornell. I moved to Emory to do my master's of public health and health policy. And after that, I took a job in California. So I started my MPH thinking that I would extend my undergrad degree in biology in genetics and development, thinking about genetic discrimination in insurance. And at the time, the 37 states attorneys generals sued the tobacco industry for damages related to cigarette smoking. And that was fascinating to me. It was also fascinating to be in Georgia when that happened, definitely a different relationship with tobacco than other places I had lived before. So that brought me to California, and I worked at the Institute for Health Policy Studies. At the time, where California was grappling with the implementation of Assembly Bill 13, which was the state smoke-free workplace law. And one of the Assembly folks thought it would be a good idea to try to sync that law by implementing it in bars and restaurants. And the other Assembly people are like, that's a great idea. We should do that. And then the sponsors of the bill were, no, we were just kidding. Don't do that. And that created this projected fight about smoking and drinking in workplaces. So that was fascinating to be part of that, witness to that experience in terms of understanding policy, but also was a really strong introduction to occupational health for me. So after that, I realized that having an MPH, you hit your head on the ceiling very quickly in academia. I tried the private sector for a little while, thought what I wanted to be when I grew up. And it turns out that, again, as John had mentioned, like being in that space where you can create evidence, create policy, is where I thought it was really exciting. And I loved working in respiratory health. You breathe every minute of every day. and have no control over that. So I really like to stay in the respiratory health space. I ended up, after working at a internet company and a nonprofit, stayed in California and went to Berkeley to do my PhD, focused on childhood asthma in urban communities. And after that experience was done, wanting to try something new, I figured, well, I haven't lived in the Midwest yet. Let me give that a try. And I was as John mentioned, Robert Wood Johnson Foundation Health and Society Scholar at Wisconsin, which was a fascinating experience, digging more into social determinants of health. Given the communities I'd worked in previously, mostly Oakland, California, in the school districts, I really wanted to partner that background in social determinants of health with environmental exposures and understanding pollution and social factors in its role in asthma morbidity, especially in income and resource challenged neighborhoods. So that led me to University of Washington, where I completed a postdoc in environmental and occupational health sciences, working on the Mesa Air project, but also having opportunity to work on local projects in the Duwamish Valley, which is an environmental justice community beset with most traffic-related pollution from diesel from the seaport of Seattle. And after that, so I had to take a job finally. So I did my first faculty stint at University of Oklahoma in the Department of Biostatistics and Epidemiology. Quickly realizing that Oklahoma, while necessary, while ranking very low in the United States on most health indices, it was a hard place to be an environmental health scientist. Not a lot of people in our sandbox there. And a job opened up at CSU, and I've been at CSU since 2013 and also a member of the Department of Epidemiology at CSPH since the same time. So that's me in terms of my work history. My research program is wide-ranging and generally focused on respiratory health in many different ways. So these are the four main things that I focus on, but as someone, a wise friend has told me, research is not only about leadership, but about followership as well. So I really appreciate not only being able to create this research program, but also being able to work with many people at the School of Public Health, many people at CSU and across different universities to really think broadly about what environmental and occupational health means. So I have a lot of focus on agricultural work, both mixtures in terms of pesticides and air pollution in the Central Valley of California, where I did some of my graduate work, have focused on antimicrobial resistance and workers, thinking about workers as vectors for bringing antimicrobial resistance from workplaces into the community, as well as, since I am at a vet school, I actually focus on air pollution impacts on dairy cows and have found some really interesting things about cows being potential sentinels for air pollution, but also that milk production decreases in dairy cows when they're exposed to PM 2.5. Part of my research program here, also transitioning from urban air pollution, which I did when I was at Berkeley, to more biogenic and, sorry, trying to turn off my volume here. Biogenic pollutants. And moving to Colorado, it's hard to ignore the fact that we are beset by wildfires and wildfire smoke season in and season out. So a lot of the research I've done also looks at exposure assessment for wildfires and health effects of wildfire smoke, not only across Colorado, but into the Mountain West as well. And now expanding that research program to focus on other types of fires. So working on landscape fires in places like Kansas, where there's prescribed burns, I'll talk about that in a little bit, as well as agricultural burns in Florida. Another focus of my research program is environmental justice. And I have done some work, especially here, we have one of our MPH students who works on the project in the global Elyria-Swansea communities based on settlement dollars from the I-70 expansion to understand how we can promote positive health in a community that's beset with so many negative environmental exposures. And I do a lot of work in schools. And it's a very interesting place. That's where I started my grad work. I spent my sabbatical last year at the Center for Green Schools, the US Green Building Council. And schools is such an interesting place to work because schools are the cornerstone of every community across America. Every community has a school. And understanding if the occupants of the school, teachers, staff, and students can work healthfully, can be in positive environments, both from a social cultural standpoint, as well as an indoor air quality standpoint, is really challenging because schools tend to be places where there's Department of Energy, Department of Education, and EPA, all circling schools idea, but no one really having ownership of health and well-being in schools. So often these different aspects of my research program intersect, again, thinking about places in California that are exposed to both heat, all heat, adverse impacts of air quality, as well as pesticides, and now wildfires and wildfire smoke too, really gets into the environmental justice aspects of what we do. So these are not siloed, these are all interconnected, and also makes just for a really fun application of our research. So I think every scholar has their origin story about what made you be a toxicologist or what made you be a biostatistician. So my origin story started in California. And I think like many of us who do MPHs, we are exposed to so many exciting things in public health. There's so many opportunities to do great work. So this is my first publication many, many years ago. And I newly minted with an MPH, I worked on that AB 13, the implementation of the California smoke-free workplace law in bars and restaurants. And my job was really to kind of track the legislative history and figure out how this law came to being. And that wasn't fun. It was really challenging to understand at that point that not everyone prioritizes health and that there are other priorities for health in the community in terms of economic health and well-being, right? If people don't have jobs, they can't be healthy. So that was a little bit frustrating. But then this article came out, written by Mark Eisner, who's at UCSF, looking at the evidence that once the smoke-free bar law went into effect, that bartenders' respiratory health after establishment of the law improved. And I said, that is powerful. And that really led me to this idea that environmental and occupational health is a place where policy matters and where science matters in the production of that policy. And I was at the American Thoracic Society meeting once, and I went up to Mark Eisner and I totally fangirled him. I'm like, oh, I love this paper. And he's like, okay. So maybe academicians don't get that a lot, but it was, again, a pivotal experience for me understanding where I wanted to be in this scientific process. And John, you captured that so well. So I appreciate that you stating that. All right, so I'm going to walk through some case studies. There's so much I can talk about you today about research, but I know I'm here for interviewing for the chair position. So I'm trying to figure out what that looks like in terms of thinking about where the future of the discipline is, as well as what potentially draws me to this school and this opportunity and what I see the future is. So at CSU, I teach an undergraduate class called Human Disease and the Environment, and it's a great class. So it's mostly seniors or fourth-year students that are environmental public health majors. We get some majors from other of the biomedical sciences disciplines at CSU. And what I call this class is a put it all together class. So this idea that they've taken Orgo, for better or for worse, most of them have taken biostats, they've taken EPI, they've taken Intro to Environmental Health. And what does that mean? And I think very much like this program trains MPH students, we do something very similar with our undergrads, where we are training students to go out into the world to be our public health professionals, especially in environmental and occupational health. And our students, as well as your students, occupy positions in local and state health departments, nonprofit agencies, and I think tend to like to stay in Colorado. So we've created this really strong network. I think it's a little bifurcated between our two schools. I would like that to change, but more on that later. So what I do for this class is I present case studies to them. And I let them know that you are the people that are going to be making these decisions when you go out. And we talk about, I let them read this article, which is really a brilliant article, written by Alec McGillis and ProPublica, which covers the impact of COVID-19 in Baltimore City schools and talks about the trade-off. Was closing down schools a good idea? And there are different sides of this, especially in a low resource school district where students are often getting meals, where students are safe and protected by adults in their community. Was this potentially a good idea to scatter them out, provide them laptops, and potentially in situations where someone wasn't at home to help them or parents weren't available because they were essential workers and they had to work? What are the trade-offs here? And I think the students expect that I have an answer. And I said, I don't have an answer. And I know right now there's been a lot of articles second guessing our decisions around COVID. Eric Kleinenberg recently had an article in the New York Times. Sandra Golea just wrote a new book about thinking about public health in an irrational time, I think was part of the title. And I said, what do you do? And what type of evidence do you need? And is this a good idea? And again, not telling them that I have the answers, but helping them work through the logic models for how they would come to decisions, how they would communicate that, and what type of data they would need to make and inform their decision. Another one we talk about extensively is ecosystem management. So I have been fortunate to have some NASA funding to look at landscape fires and agricultural fires. And if you talk to folks in Kansas, if you talk to folks in Guatemala as well, this has large ecosystem benefits, right? Especially in the tall grass prairie in Kansas and Oklahoma, that is a rapidly diminishing ecosystem. And these fire burns have multiple rationales for doing them. One, they're part of the indigenous history of the area, but in terms of recent times, they help manage the tall grass prairie from invasive species like red cedars, that then the woody encroachment, so that removes that woody encroachment, tries to keep tall grass prairie as remaining as a live ecosystem, but also encourages green up. So when cattle come up to Kansas to graze, that the grass is more nutritious after it grows after a burn, so has benefits for animal health as well. So right now in the prescribed burn community, there's an idea that there is good fire, but there is no such thing as good smoke. So how do we manage this idea of that there are ecosystem benefits, but potentially negative human health benefits? And folks from CDC and Emory just wrote a paper demonstrating increase in asthma hospitalizations resulting from a smoke from Kansas prescribed burns. And this is one of our maps too from one of our grad students, Olivia Sablon, that also shows that unfortunately Kansas is not only subjected to smoke from local fires, but also is downwind of large fires in New Mexico. And this happened to be the Hermit's Peak Calf Canyon fire that blanketed the area with smoke. So trying to manage these prescribed burns, which are generally considered ecosystem beneficial, with the massive amounts of wildfires that we get in the Mountain West, as well as the West Coast. So what's the answer here? What do we do? And another opportunity we talk about is the agricultural workforce. So this article talks about extreme heat pushes more farm workers to harvest at night, which is maybe solving the heat problem, but again, opening a door to whole new risks. And also thinking about research that I thought about ages ago about shift work and not diurnal cycles, but the idea of shift work and messing up with circadian rhythms, that was the word I was looking for, and being potentially a risk factor for cancer. Also totally disrupting workers' lives, right? Taking them apart from the social structure of their communities and families by working at night. But someone's got to pick the produce, right? Someone's got to make sure that the food system works. And how do we do that in an ethical and humane way while supporting the people that are making our food systems work? And another one, gosh, this is a pretty hot topic here in Colorado, as well as the world, energy production. So it has been fascinating, and working with radiological health scientists at CSU, this is a very, very interesting topic because they have a completely different perspective, I think, than a lot of people do. So the idea is after the Fukushima Daiichi disaster in 2011, there were some countries, especially Germany, that decided to phase down their nuclear power and replace it with, renewables were not up to scale yet. So are we going back to fossil fuel production? And what is the right idea? And then this other article more recently from the New York Times says Europe quits Russian gas. Half of France's nuclear power plants are offline for safety issues and concerns about not averting nuclear disasters in the future. And we talk about, the students have such interesting perspectives on this because it's really about risk perception, right? And that fear of nuclear power is very prominent, I think, in people's minds because of things like Chernobyl and, for those of us that remember, 3 Mile Island, as well as more recent disasters like Fukushima. So the idea is, what does our energy matrix look like? And how do we move forward as we scale up to renewables, especially as we talk about co-benefits between carbon reduction and PM 2.5 reduction? Also being mindful of EPA's new PM 2.5 standard. And the last case study I'll talk about is something that's very near and dear to my heart, which is, do data matter for community change? So as I mentioned, I work on the GES health study, and our residents in GES, our community council, is very frustrated with us because what we do is write reports. And they say reports don't help us. Everyone knows that air pollution is bad for you, and yet the academic community keeps telling us that air pollution is bad for you. We want a supermarket. We want better schools for our kids. We want parks that are safe. And we don't want gentrification pushing us out of the neighborhood. And how do we as academic partners contend with that? So again, I don't have answers to any of these things, but I think about them a lot. And I encourage my students to think about these and figure out where we land on the issues and how we approach solving these problems together. So another theme I wanted to bring up is what's old is new. So there's a long convoluted story about how I got involved with agricultural burns in Florida, and I'm happy to tell that at another time. But I did participate in this journalistic excursion looking at what is called black snow in Florida. And going through the literature, there was nothing or very, very scant articles about agricultural burning. There were some in California about rice burning in Northern California that got stopped basically because of Cal EPA and stringent air requirements in California. But this issue, and being a New Yorker, Florida feels like a second home. So I have family that lives in Palm Beach County and didn't even know that this happened. I did not know that there was massive agricultural burning in the Everglades agricultural area around sugarcane harvest. So what's interesting to me about this study and having worked in this community and getting FOIA'd from the sugar industry, another story for another time, is that it seems like these are the same stories in environmental and occupational health over and over again. This is the second article I wrote. Gosh, go back in the Wayback Time machine here. And this is when I was working on the smoke-free bar law in California. And I circled the relevant type here that I wanted to read out. The tobacco industry used historical arguments of restricting freedom of choice and economic ramifications in fighting the smoke-free bar law. We have the same story again and again, where the sugar industry is like, it's not bad for you. It's short-term burning. It's below the EPA standard. No one's sick. What's the problem? And I think the problem is that that's not true, first of all. And the second problem is that they are so contentious that they fight any academic endeavors that are in there. We have an R01 study right now to do this work in Florida, looking at cognitive decline and sugarcane burning, among other things like social determinants of health, as well as built environment. And the sugarcane industry, well, we think it is, they FOIA'd NIH and they got our documents. They got all the people that agreed to support us. Like, this is unheard of. It's quite a bit of hubris, but it seems like this chilling effect for academicians, right? I have gotten all my emails requested, and that's meaningful. Yeah, I write some really kind of irrelevant emails too. So mostly regarding what I'm going to do with my children when I'm at work. So anyway, I try to keep those on Gmail instead of my CSU account. But anyway, I mean, this is a playbook that we've seen again and again, right? People are going to lose jobs. And we don't want the community residents to have to choose between their jobs and their health. And we think about things like lead paint, about energy extraction. And again, it's the same story again and again, right? So, oh, I'm going back. No, this way. Okay. And this was a very, very humbling experience as well. So I was fortunate to be part of the CSU delegation to COP28 in Dubai in December, and it was amazing. I think one of my, I don't know if anyone feels this, I feel like one of my frustrations about going to academic conferences is that I learn really interesting things about methods. I get to see old friends from other who are in new places, but I feel like we don't do a lot of stuff, right? We just kind of like, oh, that's a great new method. I should try that. Or, hey, I really liked your talk. And it's cool to move the science forward. That is the invigorating thing about going to conferences, especially post-COVID, right? It's really the conferences online, that didn't work. And COP is really a conference like no other. It's 70,000 people from every corner of the earth. It is UN's largest conference and is really fascinating to I met someone from Papua New Guinea. I'd never done that before. It was great. And we had a CSU booth there. The difference about this conference, I really went because I wanted to see what policy making in a global scale looks like. And I decided I do not want to know what that looks like anymore. And this is the first place because, again, we are part of such a vibrant academic and practice community here in Colorado. And this is the first time I really felt like as a scientist, actually it was the second time, this first time was the tobacco control laws, where I felt as a scientist, I was on the sidelines. Even though, and we do this work here, we do this work across the country and across the globe, we know that people are dying from climate change. And it does not seem to make an impact on how we decide to run our global economy. And that's really disheartening. And it's really easy to lose faith in what we do. But what heartens me is that we know that societies can do big things for health. So one of my mentors at Berkeley, Warren Winkelstein, actually worked on the polio field vaccine trial. And thinking about this is the greatest public health experiment in history, I think we forgot those lessons, especially during the recent pandemic. And John mentioned my advisor, Ira. Ira's wife was actually one of the polio pioneers. And I don't think she's in this picture, but she's got the button in the card, which is really amazing, that thinking that people live through this and understand what it's like to be that scared, right? And to be frightened, especially because it impacted children, right? So understanding that how we move forward as society. Before I read this book, it was really this fascinating book called Patenting the Sun. I didn't know that's where the March of Dimes came from. And it was people from all over the country contributing whatever they could, whatever change could, to make this effort go. And the other thing I think about too, more related to environmental health, is something I learned from Professor Scott Denning, who's Professor Emeritus of Atmospheric Science at CSU, who said that once upon a time, we decided to marshal all of our resources and make dramatic change in the United States. And that was through indoor plumbing. And we think about the differences that made to infectious disease in the US was enormous, right? Things that we still try to do with WASH interventions in the global South. So this idea that we can do these infrastructure changes and they can make differences in environmental occupational health are really the things that keep me going. Okay, so how do I do that? And what does the future hold? So I think that one of the things I wanted to speak about is just how far we've come as a discipline. And it wouldn't be an epidemiology lecture if I didn't put up a 2x2 table. So there it is. And I think that I was trained at, in the about, I don't want to think about how long ago, but a long time ago, thinking about this group, the yes exposure group. And kind of in the context of that, this idea is that there's not health disparities, there's not health inequities, there are people that are exposed, and there are people that are not exposed. And that's where they belong in our 2x2 table. And I think with the racial reckoning we've had in this country, I see Colleen smiling. She probably had that same conversation that I did. I think what's really important for us currently is that when we consider environmental and occupational health, we need to recognize that adverse exposures occur in a social and political context. These are not accidental. And that we, again, having been trained in a risk factor method, slowly moving into causal inference, trying to identify that etiologic agent, we miss the picture a little bit in terms of thinking about, is it looking for one thing that we can legislate or one thing that we can remove for the environment? Or is it really considering the total environment, the chemical, the physical, and the social environment that promotes or detracts from health? And likewise, this group over here, no exposure and no disease, also realizing that when we consider interventions or solutions, we must acknowledge that these solutions occur in a social and political context as well. And populations may not be exchangeable in a classic epidemiologic framework. So for those of you who remember your Greenland and Maldonado, I wanted to throw that in also. I would be very proud. So the idea that environmental justice and environmental and occupational problems are local, and we cannot do one size fits all solutions. And then we have to understand, again, the context in which our problems are working. So I did an experiment. I don't know how well it worked, but I got some really pretty pictures out of it. A couple of years ago, I started teaching our environmental and occupational health class for our graduate students. And I had them try to do some causal loop diagrams, which I borrowed from a student that I mentor in systems engineering. So I had him come to class and lecture about causal loop diagrams, and they're different than DAGs. And some students really took to this, and some students did not. But I wanted to give you two illustrations of the students that really, really took this assignment seriously and gave some thought to this. So David Shutt is a recent PhD graduate in our industrial hygiene program, and he was looking at stonecutters and trying to understand the occupational challenges that stonecutters have, not only because of what we think about when we talk about hierarchy controls, but when we think about things like demand and new homes that are being built in Colorado along the I-25 corridor, and how many people want quartz or granite countertops in their kitchens or their bathrooms. So it's not only this idea about what that direct relationship between exposure and outcome is, but it's trying to understand, again, the social, the political context in what that occurs. And he did a lovely job with this. He, threw all these things in there, thinking about COVID, thinking about infrastructure, thinking about demolition. And again, just really thoughtful in terms of setting the stage for how does this occupational health problem exist in context in our society. And then I had, oh my gosh. Sorry, didn't test the slides before I put them on. So almost done. Almost done. Yeah, lots. So Kana Hobbs Murphy was an ergonomics student. I don't know if she was a MAP ERC trainee. Was she, Carol? Yeah. So, and Kana is actually now faculty at CSU. She's in the design and merchandising department. And she thinks a lot about fast fashion and production of clothes, and had this idea about musculoskeletal disorders in fast fashion industries, especially in low and middle income countries. And again, which you all saw, like step by step, created this beautiful causal loop diagram explaining from her perspective how those diseases occur in an occupational group and what that looks like in terms of the context. And that's really hard, right? That's a global model. There's global demand for fast fashion. And I think the challenges that we all had is in causal loop diagrams, like, wow, that's really, really beautiful. And what do we do about it, right? Where are we as part of this continuum? And again, I don't have answers to that, but it's something that I think is really important for us to, again, get out of our silos a little bit and really start to understand the bigger picture. And that's been a fantastic, oh, keep going. Yep. Okay. Okay. So I really appreciate that thinking. It's very hard though, right? I think it's very hard, especially as we train doctoral students, as we train scholars. I think we train MPH students with a very broad perspective, but I think that there's still this idea that when we train doctoral students, it's very much to be mastery of a very specific field and not to be generalist, right? But I think that one of the interesting things about environmental and occupational health is that you realize that the stories relate to new stories, right? Or to old stories, or to things that we learn in this discipline, how they apply to new problems. And that's been really fascinating. And I wanted to credit Donna here because I think about air pollution as related to asthma, because the respiratory system is the first interface with air pollution. And through the Healthy Start study, we've been able to think about air pollution now as related to things like birth weight and negative birth outcomes. And that has been fascinating about for us to kind of expand our thinking. And I think it's well known that PM 2.5 is a systems problem. There's no organ system that it doesn't impact. But are there ways that we can think about solving this problem, especially as we do prenatal education and we think about vulnerable populations in terms of environmental exposure? Okay, so ideas and initiatives. I realize that it might take a little bit of hubris to come into a department and say, well, this is what I'm going to do. But I wanted to get some feedback and see how this all sits with you. So I think in terms of a template for the future, I think about a mission for EOH is really pretty simple. It's to do good work and to do good. And often I've been told by a mentor that that is bifurcated in academia, especially in schools of public health, where we have our MPH fellows do good work, and our academicians, our scholars do good work. And I reject that bifurcation. I think we are all in this together, and that I think we can do both at the same time. And a vision, and hopefully again this sits well with you, to be the premier department for research and education in the continuum of environmental and occupational sciences, from cells to communities, for translation and practice. One of the things I love about the EOH department here is that you do it all, the entire continuum of environmental health and occupational health research, right? Everything from the bench science, right, to exposure science, to epidemiology, to clinical and programmatic policy types of research. It's everything. That is the whole translational pipeline. And it's really exciting that it all happens here. And then in terms of shared values, I cribbed this from some of the work that Judy Heiderscheit and Alex Brandel did at CSU, but I really like it. And hopefully, again, it resonates with you. We are mindful of our roles as scientists, educators, and members of our local and global communities. It is very hard to ignore what's going on right now in society. And I want to be a part of a community that appreciates bringing your whole self to work and not only valued for your scholarship and your teaching, but your life experience and what you bring to the table as a whole person. And then we value the positive sense of community fostered by faculty, staff, and students, which provides an environmental and professional and personal growth for all, which is really, I think, exciting way to move forward. So I wanted to talk about that a little bit and some things that I would like to initiate. So one of them, I really like acronyms. So what academician doesn't? And usually I think AI has really taken the joy out of like coming up with acronyms, like not to say that I'm going to sit in a boring meeting and like, oh, I'm going to come up with an acronym. But anyway, really thinking through what I got to work on in terms of thinking about the I-70 expansion project. And early on when I was visiting global area Swansea and thinking about what people were contending with when I-70 expansion was just planned, someone from Councilwoman Montero's office called me and she said, what should the community ask for? And I said, well, I don't know. How much time do I have? And she said, you have 2 days. I'm like, oh gosh, well, I don't know how to answer that question in 2 days. So I kind of did some thoughts and like, what would I ask for? You can ask for trees, right? You can ask for insulation. You can ask for new windows, AC units, safe parks. Again, things that we've been thinking about in the global area Swansea community. And I really thought about coming up with a way that at the time, CSU could potentially help. And I really like this idea of creating a community academic, technical, and translational support program, or catch up. And the idea here is that how do we work together in terms of mentored students, in terms of students from different disciplines, and actually be on call to answer these questions and think about if a community wants something, if Commerce City wants to have action about Suncor, what are the policies? What are the regs? What are ways that we can help? And having public health truly be interdisciplinary. This idea that bringing people who have GIS and EPI experience, biostats experience, engineering experience in the behavioral sciences, science and communication and outreach, doing these projects together to come up with solutions that are very community oriented. Part of this being at a land grant institution is very important to me because of that demonstration of translating what happens on campus to communities and the benefits that the communities should have from that campus work. But again, the word public is in the School of Public Health. And I believe that this is the responsibility of our schools of public health as well. Okay, next acronym I came up with is CIPHER, which is Colorado Institute for Population Health and Environmental Health Research. So we have 5.2 million people in the state. It's a pretty small state given the amount of landmass we have. But we are fortunate to have a well-connected research and practice community in the state. And that includes people from CSU, people from Anschutz, people at Boulder, people at different colleges across the state. And this idea that we all kind of know each other. We all work in the same communities. We end up at the same meetings. And we are unfortunately siloed by institutions and systems. And Kathy, I appreciate you being a problem solver in that position also. But we have strong relationships with policy and planning communities. Plus, we have unique environmental health problems in the Mountain West. So my proposition is to form a research entity that allows for these community academic partnerships, taking all the expertise that we have in this room and this campus and other campuses of the state to start thinking about the way we solve problems collaboratively. And I think this would be a great place to house that institution with a very cool acronym. A couple more. I know that Anschutz has been involved with developing academic health departments, both with State Health Department as well as Denver Department of Public Health and Environment, which is fantastic. And this is so cool. This is just such a neat thing. I don't know if Molly Gattillo is on the call, but I will note if she is that she would like me to say that we did it first. So anyway, CSU has a partnership with Larimer County Department of Public Health and Environment, and it's been really great. And I think part of what fosters that collaboration is that our county health commissioner graduated from our program at CSU, as well as the environmental health director. We have students there. So this idea that we have this close-knit community about how we solve problems together has been great. So one of the things I wanted to mention about the academic health departments is this new group at the Air Pollution Control Division at CDPHE, the Education and Community Opportunities Grant, which is called the group called ECHO. They are wonderful. And we had gotten a call. This was Whitney Pennington and Morgan Valley, who work on mapping air sea and high costs up at CSU, about calling us and say, folks in Southeast Colorado are really upset about trash burning and the pollution that they get from burned trash. What can we do about that? And again, we had about a half hour to have this call, and we did some risk mitigation, thinking about, well, we're not going to put in garbage trucks in Southeast Colorado. So what are other things that we can think about in terms of harm reduction? So for example, can folks contact the fire department to check on if burning conditions are safe? Do they have contained areas to burn trash in? Is there a notification system that they can tell their neighbors that they're burning trash? So this idea that we're not going to change that behavior, but are there ways that we can make that behavior safer? And it's nice to have that group. I think that's a brand new group at APCD, and they're wonderful to work with. And in terms of our academic health department at CSU, we've done some really neat things up there. We now have a funded summer intern program that again takes MPH and ERHS students into CSU, and into the health department for public health practice work. And it's been great. One of my former undergrads, her public health project was, we do not have licensed body art and tattoo parlors in Larimer County. I don't know if that's statewide or if all counties do their thing, but that is really scary because there's needles and blood involved. So the idea about, should we start licensing body art facilities? Would people be accepted? Is there more ideas that someone would go to a licensed facility than an unlicensed facility? So that's been really fascinating. Also, I had an undergrad student in my human disease and environment class who, she is from the area. She's from Metro Denver. She was really concerned that people came to CSU not understanding about things like West Nile and endemic diseases, especially infectious diseases that we have here that they might not have at home. So after wanting to create pamphlets for incoming students at orientation, we ended up back at the health department, and our environmental health manager, Chris Manley, had said, you know what, CSU might be a tough sell right now, but I have summer camp season coming up, and lots of people come to Larimer County for summer camp. So can we have these brochures you're creating available for directors, for counselors, for parents, so that they understand what to be watchful for when they're coming to Larimer County for help? And it's been student initiated, just a really, really great partnership. And again, just such a positive experience for a student also. One of the things I wanted to also mention, so many things to mention, is this idea of, yes, and John, I believe you were a part of this from the Robert Wood Johnson College Board program, the Young Epidemiology Scholars program. And I don't know if it could be called Young Environmental Health Scholars. That kind of feels like a little bit of a weird acronym. And part of that, what I think was so exciting, is that students get to learn about epidemiology when they're in high school or junior high. And I didn't really get to learn about epidemiology until I took my MPH program. So the idea of this program is really creating pathways and on-ramps for future generations of students, knowing that there are job opportunities and ways to return and give to their community through employment in occupational environmental health. And I recently learned that there is a science and technology high school right here on campus. So understanding that working in the health sciences doesn't always mean going to med school. It doesn't always mean going to nursing school or PA school. It can mean serving in a public health capacity. So that's really exciting. All right, and then the last thing I'll end up with, oh my God, I've been talking a long time, I apologize, is style. So that's my Halloween costume from 2020. Guess who I am? Okay, yeah. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about how I approach problems, especially managing a large lab group. And I think my management philosophy is very simple. You remove obstacles so people can succeed in their endeavors. That's not, right? That seems pretty straightforward. I think leadership is a little bit more complicated. And a while ago through the Robert Wood Johnson program, I had an opportunity to do a leadership seminar for alumni, and we took a lot of tests, and it was fun. So I found out that my leadership style is a coach. And I've always been confused why professional athletes need coaches, because like, doesn't LeBron James know how to play basketball? Like, why does he need a coach? And what I realized fairly late in life is that the coach is able to see the whole picture. The coach is seeing the floor and how the team interacts together. And often that's not a perspective you have when you're actually in the game. So as a coach, I take an individual approach to recognizing, cultivating talents of team members while directing everyone to a common goal, but also building a high degree of trust and what that looks like. Some famous people that have that coaching mentality are coaches. So John Wooden and Phil Jackson, and also Leslie Knope also has that coaching mentality. Okay, so I'm going to just end up. In terms of leadership in academia, is really tricky, right? Because generally we are rewarded for our individual endeavors, right? How many papers we publish, how much grants we bring in, how much money we bring in. But again, I think we all as a community need to be rowing in the same direction. And that's hard, right? Not everyone's incentives are always aligned. And I think that leadership in academia requires some strategic thinking about how we do this together. So I'm going to end there because I went way over my time, but I appreciate the opportunity to come talk to you today, and I'm happy to field any questions.
Thanks so much, Sheryl. There's time for questions. Those of you online, put your questions in chat and I'll pass them on. Gotta be a question.
The dean has a question.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sheryl.
Sure.
Excellent talk. I appreciate your comment about working with communities and relevant, right? And having an impact. What kind of faculty phenotype do you think is the right one for recruitment that can do both?
Yes, I think it's someone that has a lot of time on their hands, one. I think that it's also someone that feels, especially because building those trusted relationships are so hard, right? Engaging trust in the communities is challenging. And I think it's someone that doesn't mind going slow and hitting those bumpy roads in the beginning with support from tenure and promotion committees that understand that that process is not the same as when you work with secondary data or clinical data. So I think that it's someone that is energized by that. It can be defeating at times, but ultimately I think that maybe someone who sees that translational pipeline also being shorter, not 17 years, if they're directly engaged with the community. So I think that's someone with history before of doing that. And I did that as a doctoral student and a postdoc. And the hardest thing about it was that I left my postdoc after 2 years and those relationships got disrupted. So I think someone that's here for a committed amount of time, and I think that is excited by those things and see it as a want to rather than a must do.
Say a little bit. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Anyway,
Hi, Sheryl. I'm Wade Fern. I think we've only met by Zoom.
and maybe in person once.
I don't know. I don't think so.
Yeah, we have, it's hard. We in the before times and the after times. Yeah, go ahead, Wade. Yeah.
Well, my question's kind of related to that. You mentioned bifurcation of schools, and we have the CSU here
Mhm.
and also a CSU, and I was curious about your vision on how to better integrate so that we interact more frequently.
Yep.
Maybe not just by Zoom, although, everyone's busy.
Yeah, I think that's really one of the biggest challenge. And I always appreciate Jill inviting us at the epidemiology program to epidemiology faculty meetings. Yes, and it feels like that's one more thing, right? Because we have our own departments, plus we have these departments, and we want to be part of the CSPH community. I think that research is a great way to do that. And again, getting to work with you all on Healthy Start has been fantastic, but it's very limited. And I think that got a chance to look through the EOH faculty at CSU who are part of CSPH, and I had no idea that two of my closest collaborators were part of the EOH faculty. And I think about, are there opportunities ways we get together? I love the public health exchange that we did. Are there ways that we can extend things like MapERC to be more inclusive of folks across our 3 campuses and ways to think about doing research and education together? And again, as I mentioned, the dean and I have had some chats about how to do that better, and it's hard because we're in different systems, but I appreciate her can-do spirit and the support of both CSU faculty as well as UNC and Anschutz faculty to make this work the best we can for students. Yeah.
Very nice talk, Sheryl.
Thanks, Donna.
We are planning an ECHO investigator meeting, so be invited.
Thank you.
I very much like your picture with rowing in the same direction, and I'm curious about how you see that happening with people, groups having, their own areas of interest, focus, desires.
Yeah.
Yet, it's important to row in the same direction.
Yes.
So.
And I think that's a great question. And I don't want to come in and make demands about what the school of public health looks like, should I be fortunate to get this position. But I do think that there's certain opportunities, like the way we train students, the idea that we have writing seminars, the way we think about how do we put together a journal article, right? That's something that we need to do across all of our disciplines. And I think I've realized that no one teaches us how to do that. And part of that is really thinking about an educational experience that not only links students together potentially for a common goal, or faculty in terms of, I don't know what the situation is here about, you are all prolific grant writers. It's really, really amazing. But in terms of my environment right now, we don't have that collaboration where someone can just look at a specific Ames page and say, how does this read to you? What do you think? And I think that's so important that we do that collaboratively. So I think that although maybe subject matter wise are different, I think the academic endeavors we have in terms of teaching and research, there's a lot of commonality that can be shared among faculty.
So a couple of questions. One, the climate and health themes. That it certainly has emerged. Your thoughts there?
So I, again, have been in this air pollution space for a really long time. And I think this might be repetitive if I mentioned it at our air pollution summit in the fall, which is that in general, and I'm going to focus on specific air pollution just because it's easier, but heat is the same. And the idea that heat's not the same in this sense, we have had public agencies that allow us to use our science to make rules and regulations around air quality. And that's been amazing. So the air quality has dramatically improved across the United States, but specifically the Mountain West and the West Coast and populated areas due to the EPA NAAQS. And that has, I think, been a large part of having source controls, right? Catalytic converters on cars, movement towards an electric fleet, scrubbers on smokestacks. And now climate change has really forced us to think about interventions at the receptor level. And we know from our community behavioral health folks that behavior change is really hard. So, and a lot of us are here in Colorado. I know there's some people that are born here and raised here, but this idea, I think what draws us to Colorado is the natural beauty, the opportunities to be outside, to be engaged with the environment. And when we tell people, the gloom and doom, check the AQI, it's 150, it's 100, you shouldn't go outside, you shouldn't go outside if you have asthma, you shouldn't ride your bike, your kids can't go outside from school, they have to stay in the gym and be miserable all day. That really does not sit well with people. Or that the idea of, well, if you have to go outside and work, you're in a N95 mask. That really does not sit well with people. So I think we have to collectively, there's two things I think about there. We have to collectively shift our idea to think about behavioral change around climate change, not relying on source controls because we don't have source controls. I mean, source controls are all of us, and we're not going to, sorry for the snide remark, but we're not going to go out and rake leaves that help us mitigate this exposure. And I think, again, thinking through what looks like sounding the alarm doesn't seem to make a whole lot of impact sometimes in terms of political culture. One of the things I walked away from COP28 with, though, is that our US Senate contingent was there. Senators Cardin, Senators Coons from Delaware, Senator Schatz from Hawaii, Senator Murkowski from Alaska. Our politicians take this very, very seriously. And that was actually really encouraging. I think our governor takes this seriously. I think people in the state take this very seriously. So the idea about, can we still think about those translational pipelines about bridging our science to local state health officials is hopefully a way to a path to move forward. But I do think that we have to think about interventions now on the receptor side.
Great, thanks. Any last questions? Thanks so much, Sheryl.
Yes, absolutely.
Presentation. Okay, thanks. Thanks, Sheryl.
Yeah, thanks everyone for coming.
We have one comment.
Oh, thank you. I
I think I've forgotten that you endured Stan as well.
Yeah, they're I ended up meeting, I'm trying to know if I told you this story. When I was interviewing for RWJ, I was at Michigan and I met George Capper.
Yeah, sure.
And he had said, wow, you have a reputation for working with assholes. I'm like, well, I guess so.
Great talk.
Thanks, Lee. Yeah. So I mean, Colleen is also like through the IRA experience.
Yeah, well.
It definitely.
I remember Stan's welcome.
Stan is.
Yeah.
Interesting personality. Yeah, thanks, Don. Thanks for the question.
We actually just talked about an investigator meeting for ECHO because we're starting a new cycle and haven't met yet.
Yeah, we'll do that. I look forward to that. And, I would love that. Yeah, and how's Ann doing with the remote? Yeah, okay.
Encourage those collaborations.
Yeah, and she, I mean, Ron has got so much energy too.
Become more of
Yeah, okay, thanks for coming by. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Yeah.
See you on.
Sounds great, John.
Well, I'll-
We're
I'll
having,
pay you yeah, yeah.
Perfect, but we're having dinner tomorrow. Okay, perfect, yeah.
And then I indirectly made it into Michael Lewis's book, Premonition, where he features a young epidemiologist.
Oh,
Fantastic.
which one?
Premonition.
Premonition.
Yeah, it's about the pandemic.
Oh, that one. I haven't read that one yet. Yeah, I like his writing. Okay, I'll look for that. Yeah. Hi, thanks for coming. Good.
Do it like, what's the assignment after this?
There's a search committee and John is the chair of the search committee. So I'm sure there will be, actually, Sydney